Greetings, everybody. Keith here. Hoping everybody's having a good day, enjoying life, living life, loving life. Want to remind everybody, please hit that like, share, and subscribe button. There's a PayPal link down there for anybody that wants to share some love. And, of course, the StreamYard link for anybody that wants to join the panel. And Pythagoras Beck's down there just popping in. Say hello. Greetings. And tonight we are again talking about the Creed of Freedom from Freedom Force International. If you folks are familiar with G. Edward Griffin and the creature from Jekyll Island, he wrote about the Federal Reserve, and he has now created Freedom Force International, Red Pill Expo, things like that. And there is a link down there for the Freedom Force International that we're looking at tonight. We're looking at the Creed of Freedom. The Creed of Freedom. Last week we looked at the front page, and this is the internet site, Freedom Force International, that he just dropped the link. And we did the home page last week. Today we're doing Creed of Freedom, and it's got a little introduction here. The Creed of Freedom. So we're going to get into it. And again, I remind everybody, go ahead and feel free to hit that link. Come on up and talk about it with me if you want. An introduction by G. Edward Griffin, like I said, author of Creature from Jekyll Island, exposing the Federal Reserve and how it's created and what it's about. I'm not sure he mentioned much on the International Bank of Settlements that was established at during World War I in relations to reparations and the reserve bank system that was set up at that time. But the Federal Reserve is merely a part of that. It says, there is nothing more common in history than for oppressed people to rise up against their masters and at great cost in treasure and blood, throw off the old regime. This is what they talk about, throwing off that despotic government. We have that, not only the right, but the duty to prevent our future generations from becoming enslaved by such a despotic government, only to discover that they have replaced it with one that is just as bad or worse. That is because it is easy to know what we dislike about a political system, but not so easy to agree on what would be better. In other words, we agree on all the drama and the corruption and this and that, and we like to point fingers and stuff at blame and fault and cause and all that, but we don't do anything about an actual effect to show progress and improvement of overcoming such things. For most of history, it has been the habit of men to focus on personalities rather than principles. This is why that 14th Amendment is so important as it relates to the first 10 articles of the Bill of Rights and how they are protecting the rights of persons. Rights and liberties of persons. See, a living soul, as we are beings, to be or not to be, that's an action thing, and not a thing where you're described by a noun, but rather by an adjectival transformative, such as living soul. So everybody goes by this record of persons and identity rather than the verb of what they're doing in life, the effects. They have thought that the problem was with the man who rules, not with the system that sustains him. So they merely replace one despot for another. That's what I was saying about the despotic government. Thinking that somehow the new one will be more wise and benevolent. Even if the new ruler has good intentions, even if the ruler has good intentions, he may be corrupted by the temptations and power in those rare cases where he is not. Eventually, he is replaced by those or by another who is not as self-restrained. So even if you get a good guy in office, there's a limit to the terms. Notice how that's why they're screaming for limitation of terms on Congress and stuff, because it seems like those people are the true corruptions. Those are the ones that might have entered into it as a benevolent purpose, but found that the stock market was much more ludicrous. As long as the system, so long as they could help manipulate it, right? As long as the system allows it, it's just a matter of time before a new despot will rise to power. To prevent that, it is necessary to focus on the system itself. God, this seems to be in alignment. Gosh, this seems to be in alignment. Whoever you call your higher power, this seems to be in alignment with a similar message of the very same thing coming from Jack, talking about it's the system that people are placating. Same thing I've been telling people about. It's not you, it's the record. The individual's name and social security number identify the record. Therefore, the individual's name and driver's license identify the driver's license. The individual's name and library number identify the library record. The individual's name and employment number identify the employment record. The individual's name and address identify the residential record. The individual's name and tax number identify the tax record. It never identifies the real living soul. It is just a personification, the personality, rather than the principle. Okay? Not personalities. For that to happen, it is just important to know, or just as important to know what we are for as it is to know what we oppose. And this goes to the ideologies, not the things themselves, but the actions, the purpose, the intent to do and follow up with such deeds. Even today, with so much talk about fighting to defend freedom rather than liberties and rights, who can define what that word means? For some, freedom means merely not being in jail. Who can define the essence of personal liberty? There it's attached to the person. Here it's the living soul. And then the person that it's attached to is then further personified by enumeration in a contract for rights. Who can look you in the eye and say, this I believe, and I believe it for this reason, and this reason, and this reason also. See, the world is dying for something to believe in. A statement of principles that leaves no room for misunderstanding. So it sounds like it's on the same path as rightly dividing the word of truth. A creed that everyone of good faith toward their fellow human beings has nothing to do with religion, spirituality. Some might take it in spirituality as it uses this term here, faith or word, toward their fellow human beings, can accept with clarity of mind and strength of resolve. This part here is talking about those differences, the diversity of people that we come across, that we have the strength to be able to deal with those differences and come with the resolve of the clarity that we are still fellow human beings. There's an old saying that if you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything. The Creed of Freedom that you're about to read is the rock-solid ground that will allow us to stand firm against all the political nostrums of our day and those in the future as well. So again, it's looking out for the future generations. The Creed expresses the core ideology that binds all members together. This is not like the platform of a political party that typically is a position statement on a long list of specific issues and which changes from year to year to accommodate the shifting winds of popular opinion. Instead, it is stated in terms of broad principles that do not change over time and that are not focused on specific issues at all. So we're going to find out after we read this section. It's going to have the creed here, and we're going to find out what those broad principles are, and maybe it'll help us understand the issues. Particularly as they relate to ourselves and our own comprehension of freedom, liberty, and rights, as they're all different. If these principles are followed, most of the vexing political and social issues of the day can be resolved in confidence that the resulting action will be consistent with compassion, justice, and freedom. So it sounds a lot like coming with equity. If one wants equity, one must first come with clean hands. That's that foundation of principles. Although I authored the creed, I cannot claim credit for it. All the concepts are taken from great thinkers and writers of the past. My role has been merely to read the literature, sort the concepts into categories, and condense them into summary statements. Some marry. They're married to some. He's stating his value. These statements are connected to his values. Summary statements. When you read the creed, please be mindful that is an abstract of an essay that is published elsewhere on this site. The depth of the creed cannot be fully appreciated without explanations, definitions, and arguments that support it. Although the creed appears here first, it is recommended that after reading it, you follow a link below at the end of this section that takes you to the essay entitled The Chasm. The Chasm, however you want to pronounce it. So, Creed of Freedom in basic summary. Intrinsic nature of rights. Intrinsic. In other words, it's central to each and every one of us. Not external, but internal. That's that freedom that's internal in every one of us before there's any other kind of classification, even whether it be that adjectival transformative noun phrase known as an adjective, living soul, but even man or anything else. See, it's a basic. This is why we have this controversy, Wade versus Roe, on abortion and all that. What is the intrinsic nature of rights? The freedom that we have internally before we even become that, quote, living soul. See, that life was instilled by us, not by mom and dad, but by something greater that gave mom and dad their life. I believe that only individuals have rights, not the collective group. Collective group would be the societal part, I think, is what he's talking about here. The democracy, the political realm that would determine what those individual rights are under a constitution. Thank God for the 9th Amendment. that these rights are intrinsic to each individual, not granted by the state. For if the state has the power to grant them, it also has the power to deny them. And this is incompatible with personal liberty. There's that word liberty, incompatible with personal liberty. So we have freedom, rights, and liberty. The personal liberty is the first institution of person, where under it is listing its rights to be able to contract as a representation of the living soul. Age of majority, competent mind, sound mind. I believe that a just state derives its power solely from its citizens. Reread that 10th Amendment and understand that 9th Amendment for what it is. Therefore, the state must never presume to do anything beyond what individual citizens also have the right to do. So when they provide a limitation on your right to travel, that's what it is. It's a limitation. Therefore, the state must never presume to do anything beyond what individual citizens also have the right to do. As individual citizens, collectively delegating powers to the government, it's been so discerned that the government can license for certain purposes. Now it's up to the people to comprehend what those certain purposes are and make sure that they don't fall into the status of being presumed to be under those specific conditions. This is that coming with clean hands. Make sure you know what you're doing. Otherwise, the state is a power unto itself and becomes a master instead of the servant of society. Supremacy of the individual. I believe that one of the greatest threats to freedom is to allow any group, no matter its numeric superiority, to deny the rights of the minority, and that one of the primary functions of a state is to protect each individual from the greed and passion of the majority. In other words, if a democracy should become so despotic, the government itself is supposed to uphold an integrity that it doesn't use eminent domain and the safety and public good of the common people, the group, over the individual and the necessities of life for their commercial bullshit. Okay? Freedom of choice. I believe that desirable social and economic objectives are better achieved by voluntary action than by coercion of law. And the coercion of law is simply in the fact that the law is based on the fact that it is made for the lawless. In other words, there are people out there that don't need to know the letter of the law because they already have a basic common sense of nature, instincts, and reasonable objectivity and fairness and good faith and all that. That they just don't go around doing stupid things like doing 60 miles an hour in a 25-mile-an-hour school residential zone with cars tightly packed and parked along the sides. You're much safer to do 60 miles an hour on an open highway where it's allowed. Reasonable objectivity. I believe that social tranquility and brotherhood are better achieved by tolerance, persuasion of that common sense, reasonable objectivity, faith, and good fair dealings, good faith and fair dealings, things like that. You know, the things that are embedded in our nature to do unto others as we would have them do unto ourselves. And the power of good example than by coercion of law. I believe that those in need are better served by charity. The scripture even says this. Faith, hope, and charity, which the third of these is of the greatest, which is the giving of one's own money than by welfare, which is the giving of other people's money through coercion of law. Property rights are human rights. These are distinct definitions that they're using in their legalese in various different legal forums. Again, learning the language is an important aspect, and understanding how to put it back down into its simple forms like this here. I'm sure many of you people understand these concepts in their basic, concise forms. You don't need legislated acts and laws to tell you that this is supported in law. You don't need to read all the statute codes, rules, and regulations that I've read to show the public servants where it says these same things, that they have a duty under that public service, which is a public trust, to maintain the integrity of that government so it doesn't seem like it's despotic to many of us. I believe that human instinct for private property is a positive force. So it's a necessity to help build so that our private property isn't disposed of by that despotic government, depositioned, very close terms, is a positive force for where it has been posited. See how relative this language is? Force, because it provides an incentive for production, which is necessary for the material support of mankind. So if we believe in societies, we have to believe in production. And in order to believe in production, we have to have the incentive, because that's the force behind the positive building of that society as it starts. This is the very nature of our humanity. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Helping each other build and collect their properties, necessities, keeping things in store, comforts and conveniences. It unjustly rewards those who use resources wisely and punishes those who abuse them. It justly rewards those who use resources wisely and punishes those who abuse them. I might have misstated that. I thought I said unjustly. It justly rewards those who resources wisely and punishes those who abuse them. This is why you see people that when they get nice houses, they appreciate them. They keep them clean. They keep them maintained. They keep the gutters clean. They don't let the gutters fall apart after years of not taking care of them because they just like it looking nice for a certain number of years. It's relative to the talents of the parable of the talents. Those without property must depend on others for survival, and those who depend on the state must serve the state. Therefore, private property is a human right based on individuality again, and that single productive individual and his incentives, what he likes. Some of us don't have the same incentives. I don't need a 23-room mansion with 5 bathtubs, 2 swimming pools, or 5 bathrooms, 2 swimming pools, and this and that. So my incentive to obtain that kind of property is different. I don't have it. But I do have an incentive for production. I don't need to depend on humanity and welfare and all of that. Essential for prosperity, justice, and freedom. Many might say I do. Many might say I live off of welfare and my companion. I would urge you to think different. Money without coercion. I believe in freedom to accept or reject any currency or other forms of money based entirely upon my personal judgment of its value. If we understand 18 U.S.C. 8, obligations and other securities of the United States, in a very simple statement stated within that code, stamps and other representatives of value This is what he's talking about. He's talking about representatives of value. It's what I mentioned earlier. Summary statement. He's marrying the value of his statement. He's making a connection with his statement to his values. Upon my personal judgment of its values, upon my summary statement. Because of monopoly over the issuance of money and power to force others to accept it leads to corruption, inflation, and legalized plunder. And I believe he's correct in that it's under my opinion that the Constitution where it states that the ability to coin lawful money and currency lies in the federal government is false. But that's the indication of that mammon money. And that's, again, that the parable of the talents, wherein it speaks specifically therein of the Lord's money. And your talents are the actions, the deeds that you take during your life. Equality under the law. I believe that all citizens should be equal under law, regardless of their national origin, race, religion, gender, education, economic status, lifestyle, or political opinion. Likewise, no class should be given preferential treatment, regardless of the merit or popularity of its cause. Now, this I might I would have to disagree with this because, again, the preferential treatment is still going to come from the individual. Even in a democracy, the preferential portion of the democracy still comes with the individuals that put that preference forward individually. But again, it speaks of that democracy becoming despotic and insane and preferring things like walking off of a bridge rather than using that objective logic and reason again, which is certainly easy to tell. I mean, we see a lot of it today, in my opinion, when we see all these rainbow lunatics, if you want me to call them that. I mean, we want to do ad hominems and pronouns. You know, like I said, I'm not the noun as the thing. I'm a verb. I'm a living soul as an adjective or a noun phrase in action. In action. To favor one class over another is not equality under the law. So, again, this is the keeping up with the Joneses and the very intrinsic nature of rights and that incentive that we're talking about that becomes compatible with your own personal liberty. Okay? When we talk about keeping up with the Joneses, I don't need to keep up with the Joneses if I've only got 1 acre of lawn to mow. I don't need the big fancy riding mower that my neighbor might have to mow his 10 acres. So equality under law in this aspect is still referencing those personal liberties, that you have equality to seek what is compatible in your life. In other words, we don't have to stand up to the standards set in law or anything else. As long as we're not injuring or harming others, we don't have to stay up with some kind of personal perspective as it goes to that democratic objective viewpoint. We don't have to maintain that popularity contest. You can still be a great man without having all kinds of money and stuff. And the story of Christ is proof of this. Same with Job. Even if you get it all and it's all taken away, where does your greatness come from? The great leader. I believe that the leadership is a natural, outgrowth of human dynamics and is essential for social order and large-scale tasks. In other words, again, as it goes to developing and growing a society, as mankind started out, it took leadership roles. People that had certain talents had to step forward and share those talents with people that didn't understand things and just give them certain directives so they could perform certain tasks and create and build a society on a large scale. However, there are two types of leadership. One is based on coercion and decree found in military organizations and totalitarian political systems. Why do you think they call him commander-in-chief? Okay. The other is based on persuasion and good example, found in voluntary organizations and free political systems. And the greatest voluntary organizations are at your local levels, where you can voluntarily exchange your labors and commodities locally without the need for any other currencies, under your freedom and powers of contracts, securing the liberties in personifications of those contracts. You can do all of this one man to another man without any third-party interveners. Leaders must be judged not only on their goals, but on which type of leadership they offer. Which type of leadership they offer. Again, that's going to the talents. Everybody has different talents. Some have multiple talents. Some are stuck with one talent. Some have 3 or 4 talents. Some have 5, 6 talents. Multi-talented. It's like a lot like the senses. A lot of people think they only have 5 senses. When people start waking up and realizing they have a sense of balance and they have a good sense of direction and up and down and all that, and they get really good at the uneven bars or the parallel bars or the balance beam or tumbling. Their goals may be admirable, but how they pursue them may be tyranny. All totalitarian systems have a great leader who claims to represent the will of the people, but who is in reality a dictator. What do you think your Congress does? Literally, folks, that's what Congress does. They dictate. The House and Senate together. They dictate. They legislate the laws. They make the dictionaries with the definitions for the legal venues. Okay? Technocracy, ruled by scientists and computers, is a variant of collectivism. Great leader because, although it claims to replace human greed, ignorance, and passion, it is covertly controlled by computer data selected and monitored by humans. This is why I talk about those data elements everybody keeps giving up and not understanding, again, that individual's name and number identify the record. It does not identify you. And when you start giving up those data elements and taking that identification and taking upon the duties and obligations of that personification without knowing what you're doing, you become the slave to that society. You become what I call that bitch-ass slave. And listen, folks, I've done it myself. I, too, was the bitch-ass slave. I was the fucking fool. I'm trying to help people come out of her and how to stand on your own. You don't need that identification. That's identifying a record. Know thyself. And as long as you keep holding those records, you become a custodian of that record, a holder that is liable for that record. Why? Because you're a holder of the record. It's a hot potato. If you get rid of the record, you're no longer liable. That tells me the liability is in the record. As long as you keep identifying as that record, you will keep taking upon that liability because you yourself will be a liar. And there is no time when a man is more honest with himself than when he admits himself to be that liar. Proper role of the state when it comes to those lies. I believe that the proper role of the state is negative, not positive, defensive, not aggressive. It is to protect, not to provide. For if the state is granted the power to provide for some, it must also be able to take from others, and that always leads to legalized plunder and loss of freedom. This is the aspect where they're legalizing weed. Everybody's so happy they're legalizing weed. You have that common law right, the unwritten law. Weed, as they define it, cannabis, in many other forms, sativa, all kinds of stuff. Hemp. Literally is, thesaurically, all stems from an herb, a flowering plant that bears seeds. Okay. So what they do when they legalize is they put a limitation that people must bow down to under a licensure or oath or some kind of belief that that law, they are subject to that specific law. So then people go out and they register their grow organizations and everything, so they can be regulated. This is a willingness to be regulated, saying you don't know what you're doing. You have to have the law written down for you because you are lawless. The law is made for the lawless. Otherwise, you would know how to do it without that law. If the state is powerful enough to give us everything we want, it also will be powerful enough to take from us everything we have. Therefore, the proper function of the state is to protect the lives, liberty, and property of its citizens, nothing more. That state is best which governs least. And then it's got down here some pictorial graphic information we're going to look at. In day-to-day application, the Creed of Freedom can be reduced to just 3 simple rules. We call them the 3 commandments of freedom. Individual rights. Only individuals have rights, not groups. Okay? And this is one place where, again, there's a minor discrepancy, but I have to tend to agree. Therefore, do not sacrifice the right of any individual or minority for the alleged rights of groups. For the alleged rights of groups. And I guess it's not really a discrepancy. I guess I misread it, because therefore do not sacrifice the rights of any individual. And as I've expressed, my freedom of expression as individual right in itself is a great right, because it gives me the right not just to express myself, but also the right to observe and to record what I've observed, so that I can then put it forth in an expression of my interpretation for others. Okay, that's that group of people where the others, there's a group of people out there that when you put them together exponentially, you have a greater right to know what I am trying to express. Okay. And I support that group more than my own individual rights in most senses for that. But again, that's that teach a man or give a man a fish, you feed him for a day. But if you teach him to fish, you feed him for a lifetime. And that's to pass on that principle to the next man, that talents, to go forth with the talents. That's the true talent. The true benefit is the knowledge. Equality under the law. To favor one class of citizens over others is not equality under the law. Therefore, the people that have a right to know, exponentially, their right seems to be more powerful. But without my right to individually express myself, they're not going to know anything. So as long as governments keep trying to shut people up, they're doing too much. Therefore, do not endorse any law that does not apply equally or to citizens equally. Therefore, do not apply any law that does not apply to all citizens equally. Defense only. See, the object of government is to protect, not to be offensive and affronting, but to protect. The proper function of the state is to protect, not to provide. Therefore, do not approve coercion for any purpose except to protect human life, liberty, and property. This is the principle of non-aggression. Principle of non-aggression under the law of nations. They're not supposed to be acting against people that are not aggressive. And in presenting their laws the way they do, and applying them to people that they do not apply to, they are violating this very principle. The law is made for the lawless. 3 pillars of freedom. Freedom. And under the freedom, you have the individualism, which is what I call liberty. Under that liberty, you have rights, equality, and defense. These are your contract terms. Okay? Your rights are contractual. In your rights being contractual, those contracts have equal consideration and equal benefit. If there becomes detriment, you have the ability to defend against further loss. Another way of viewing these principles is to consider them as the 3 pillars of freedom. They are concepts that underlie the ideology of individualism, liberty, and individualism is the indispensable foundation of freedom. The rational and historic support of the creed of freedom, see chasm. Chasm, however you want to pronounce them. And like I said, individualism is your liberties. And under individualism, I say your liberties, because you have the ability to separate from that person, that personification. You are at liberty, on leave. You don't have to act in person under contract. You can act as the living soul, the steward, bringing forth the word of truth, rightly dividing it. So again, I dropped that link in the chat. I'll drop it one more time. Anybody else? And so again, next week we'll go through, or next time, I might do it sooner. But next time we'll go through the code of conduct and talk about it as it relates to plenipotentiary powers, diplomatic etiquette, how to present yourself, how to address each other. And again, this is the foundation of identity. The first law of logic is identity. The thing about the Christian scriptures and calling their in Catholicism and all the other different Christian sects, the different orders and orthodoxies and everything, they call it God. Yet in their scriptures, it clearly says that we're supposed to call it I am forever. And yet we fall into calling it God in those very scriptures. So I don't know if the ones that wrote the scriptures didn't get it or what, but clearly either a misinterpretation or miscommunication, something that creates a controversy in my mind, and help me to look out that very foundation of identity. The individual's name and social security number, folks, identify the record. And that's all this government does, is it keeps records. It's not supposed to do anything else. And that record is a matter of protecting the truth. It's supposed to have a certain integrity. It doesn't. Therefore, it can do neither any element of what it's supposed to do. And that's because the people aren't competent themselves to understand how this system works. It's a record-keeping system. That's all it is. It's a system. Like I said in that creed, in that information we talked about, it's not the people. It's more about the principles and how the people have lacked and fallen subject to the systems because of the personalities. So again, think about this stuff. And yes, Bad Bullet Barney says, tickle the like and share and sub. Hit them buttons. There's a PayPal link down there for anybody that wants to share some love. Always appreciated. And you guys know me. I love you, but I don't give a rat's ass whether you love me back. That's say I don't care if you hate me. I don't care if you don't respect me. That's on you. So may God bless you. And think about the Heroic Imagination Project. Pay attention, folks.